You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 194. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. If you have been following along, then you will know that we are at part 3 of a 3-part masterclass series all about getting a new job at a law firm. This is specifically for lawyers who are going from firm A to firm B and want to know more about the process. If you are new to this podcast, if this is the first time that you are tuning in, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you here. My name is Paula Price. I am a lawyer turned coach for lawyers. And this podcast is all about supporting lawyers, helping them achieve a more joyful practice, more fulfillment at work, helping lawyers find the right role for them, helping lawyers thrive in the role that they're in, whether that is through greater practice management and time management skills, whether it's through developing your leadership skills, whether it's through developing your sense of self-confidence as a lawyer, all of these things. These are things we dive into in this podcast. And this particular episode, as I mentioned, is the finale of a 3-parter where what we are doing is a deep dive into the process of getting a job at a law firm. Now, if you have been following along, then you have been through the first 2 parts of this series. And in just a minute, I'll go through a recap of what we've already covered. If you're just joining today and you're wondering if you should go back to the beginning, maybe. If you have already landed a new position and what you're really focused on is hitting the ground running, then you can probably start here. You may go back to the earlier episodes just to see what you might learn about them. If you've already been through the process, you might find it helpful just to revisit some of your goals for your new job, some of the deep work that I mentioned in the first episode, really getting to know yourself. And you might also find that there are components of those episodes that help you, right? Help you hit the ground running in your new role. So you could go back to those episodes, or you might just want to start here, right? Start here, thinking about the future, thinking about what you want to do in your new role in order to really set yourself up for success. So that is the focus of today's episode. Now, taking a step back just for a minute, the reason why I'm doing this series, the reason why I have created a 3-part series about really the mechanics of going from job A to job B is that many lawyers reach out to me because they would like my help in making a transition themselves. And what I often hear is things like, I have never really needed to do this before. I got hired at my firm based through the recruitment process at my law school. I didn't really know at the time what I was looking for because I'd never practiced in a law firm setting before. Now that I have some experience under my belt, I think I'd like to make a change, but I really don't know where to even start. So this is something I hear fairly frequently. It could also be lawyers who have been through the process before, right? You may have already been in practice at maybe 2 or more firms. And what you might have found is that, yes, you made a transition, but you didn't really end up somewhere where you felt like it was a better fit for you. Maybe it doesn't have the opportunities that you wanted. You're not really driving the way that you expected that you would. And so you might look at the process and think, okay, is there something that I can do differently in this process so that not only can I go from job A to job B, but I can go from a job where I'm so happy to one where I'm really thriving. And so this process is designed to help you do that. Now, you are more than welcome to follow these steps. That's why I'm sharing them with you. These are the steps that I follow with my clients when I take them through job transitions. And I find because I've done this multiple times, I have developed somewhat of a framework. And so I'm sharing that with you because I want you to have access to that information. If you're not happy in your current role, I don't want you to stay stuck because you don't know what to do next. Here is a roadmap for you. I will include with this series a downloadable roadmap, a downloadable checklist, I should say, that gives you the steps that we've talked about in this podcast series. You can always go back and listen to this podcast series again. I want you to have this information so that lack of information isn't a barrier between you and finding a job that you really, really love. So this is my gift to you, right? I want you to have this roadmap. And if you would like additional support, of course, you can reach out to me. I would be delighted to help you navigate these steps, right? And I would also encourage you, if you don't necessarily want to work with me as your coach, to find somebody who can support you, to find a coach who can help you through your transition, because it can be so helpful to have someone who's in your corner, someone who is there to support you, someone who you can bounce ideas off of, who you can do some review with, right? If you go for an interview and it doesn't go so well, you might do a play-by-play, right? Like, here's what happened in the interview. What do you think I'm doing here that maybe isn't putting my best foot forward? What else could I do in a future interview? You can have help preparing for interviews, reviewing your materials, talking about some of the challenges that you're facing, sharing your wins, right? I mean, there's nothing more satisfying than helping somebody land a great position where they then report to you about how happy they are, and you get to see them really blossom in their new role. So I would encourage you to use these podcast episodes in a way that best supports you. If you are not going through a transition yourself, but you have someone in your life who is going through a transition, by all means, share these episodes with them as well. I would love for them to have them. If you are someone who works with lawyers, right? Maybe you are the director of professional development and you'd like to provide an additional resource to lawyers who are transitioning, by all means, this can be a resource for them as well. I can be a resource for them as well. And so this is really designed to help the lawyers out there who want to go from job A to job B. As I mentioned earlier, I'm really focused on law firm transitions, but much of this would apply to a transition that isn't another law firm. It could be going to government. It could be going in-house. So these are things that you will want to keep in mind as you go through the job transition process. So with that, what we're going to do today is we're going to summarize the steps that we've already covered in part 1 and part 2. And then we're going to cover the transition point today, right? The success at your new firm. So just to begin, in terms of what we've already covered then, part 1 of this series was all about preparing to change jobs. So before you even put your CV together, before you start putting your resume out there, I would encourage you to do the prep work that is required to set you up for a successful transition. It's really setting the foundation about who you are, what you're looking for, and how you're going to approach this process. So the 3 things we covered in that episode were, number 1, we talked about making a decision, right? Making the decision to apply for another job, making the decision to leave the firm that you're at. So that was step 1. Sometimes you are the one who's making that decision. You're making it proactively and willingly. Sometimes the decision is made for you, and there are different considerations that would apply in those scenarios. And sometimes you're stuck in a decision. And if you're someone who's stuck in a decision, I hope that this series is helping you see that if you are leaning toward moving, and one of the reasons you're not is because you're afraid of what the process is going to be like, you don't know where to start, it feels overwhelming. I hope that this series has made it more manageable, that it is now more tangible, that it is less overwhelming. Yes, there are a number of steps involved. It is the work of 3 episodes, and I've made lots of references to other episodes. So yes, there are a number of factors at play, but it doesn't have to be super complicated. These are the steps that you would follow. And so it becomes a question of simply writing out those steps and then deciding what kind of timeline is best for you and working your way through these steps. So we talked about making a decision. Then we talked about setting your GPS, right? Where is it that you want to go? What kind of job do you want to end up in? And that really was the self-exploration, right? What do you love? What do you value? What kind of work do you want to do more of? What kind of work environment is ideal for you? What kind of work environment is not ideal for you, right? What does your perfect job look like? Describe a perfect day. So these are all questions. These are all geared at helping you define where it is that you think that you want to go. And I say think that you want to go because sometimes you think you want to go to destination A, and the more research you do, right? This could be the initial research or the informational interviews or interviews themselves. You might discover that what you think you wanted or what you thought you wanted, in fact, is not what you actually want, in which case you'd want to recalibrate your GPS settings so that you get to go in the direction that you really want to go to. So that was the second step in part 1. And then we talked about mindset. So that really is just putting on a mindset that's going to support you in the steps, right? Something to help you find the gratitude for where you have been, to help you build the confidence that you need moving forward, to have that sense of value, to see yourself as a contributor, and to have the patience that is sometimes required when the process takes time, right? For some people, that process will happen really quickly, right? The market might be really good. There happens to be an opening at an ideal spot just at the time that you're applying. That can happen, but sometimes the economy is slow, positions haven't really opened up, and so it can take a little bit longer. And we just want to make sure that you have the right mindset so that you are able to maintain a sense of positivity, that you're able to feel like you are supported, feel like you have that faith that things are going to work out, because sometimes it can be hard, right? If the process is taking a while. So that was part 1. If you haven't listened to it and you are embarking on a job transition process, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that. Part 2 was all about getting a job, right? This is really the mechanics of going out there and looking for a job and interviewing and negotiating or accepting an offer, whatever that looks like for you. So in that episode, what we did is we started out by talking about exploring your options, right? This is really the research to discover what kind of jobs are out there. So I talked about the jobs that are posted jobs, the ones that you'll find on job boards or law firm websites. And then we also talked about these sort of so-called hidden jobs, right? The hidden job market and how you would go about finding those. We talked about submitting application materials. So we talked about getting your CV up to snuff. We talked about getting your cover letters ready. And we talked about how ultimately in that equation, what you're trying to do is create an opportunity for an interview, and that the way that you do that is through that paperwork sometimes, right? Sometimes it's a combination of paperwork and informational interviews. But ideally what you're trying to do is demonstrate to the hiring organization that the thing that they are looking for is exactly what you have to offer, right? You're trying to establish that match between what they want and what you can provide. And so I offered some suggestions in terms of how you can approach preparing your CV, preparing your cover letter. We talked about going out and networking. And in hindsight, I realized that I did not spend a ton of time on this section in that episode. The networking for job seekers, I do have an entire podcast episode that is dedicated to that process. So if that's a stage that you are in or you would like more information about that, by all means, listen to that podcast episode. What I'd like to acknowledge here is that the process of researching, identifying people, reaching out to them, having coffee dates, having informational interviews, following leads, starting with the warm leads, moving on to cold leads. So starting with people that you know, moving on to people that you don't yet know, all of that, it does take time. And if the search goes on, you may find that you are approaching this in layers, right? You might have a top tier of the people and the firms that you're interested in, and then you may move to another tier, to another tier. And so you might find that this is an ongoing process. And I just wanted to acknowledge that that is an area that can be challenging. That is an area where you'll really need that patience, where it may become harder to maintain that positive attitude. And I just wanted to let you know that if that's where you're at, not to worry, that you can have faith that as long as you keep with that process, you will eventually find the job that you're looking for. And I think I mentioned in the first episode that when I used to go out looking for summer jobs, right, as a student, my mom would say, oh, Paula, you only need one job. And the same is true here, right? You only need one job. And so all the work that you're doing is laying the foundation to find that job. It's also laying the foundation for your future network. So all those conversations that you have, they're not lost if they don't end up in a job offer. They are connections with other lawyers who are within your community who you may have a lifelong relationship with. You never know. So that was something that we talked about in the last episode, was creating interviews by preparing your materials, by applying for jobs, by networking. We also touched on working with recruiters, right? Having somebody who could potentially support you in your transition. Then we talked about preparing for the interviews themselves. So I offered some suggestions on how you can do that. And then we talked about negotiating your offer. And sometimes the offer as it comes in is exactly what you want. You're not necessarily going to try to negotiate a different offer, but there are times where you may want to negotiate certain terms of your offer. So we touched on that as well. So here we are finally at part 3, right? And so if this is a process that applies to you, I just wanted to thank you for being here and acknowledge you for doing this work, right? For learning everything that you can learn about the process and how to set yourself up for success. And today, really what we are focused on is you have your job now, and how do you go from getting the job, right? You've now successfully got the job. Congratulations. This is something to be celebrated. And then how do you leave your current job if you are currently at a firm or another place of employment? How do you want to leave and then start out that next job on the right foot, right? You want to hit the ground running. So today we're going to talk about leaving your job on a good note. We're going to talk about how to succeed in your new role. And that really is made up of 3 parts: preparation, when you actually start working at the job, and then finally some ongoing maintenance. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As I mentioned, I will be preparing a checklist. It'll be available when this podcast episode goes live with all the different steps so that you've got them in one place. You've got an easy reference and you can download that. You'll find it on the webpage with the show notes for this podcast episode. And if you have trouble finding that, just send me a note and I will send you the link. So, number 1. Leave your job on a good note. Now, I realize in this point that I am completely biased. I firmly believe in leaving a job on a good note. I know lots of people who are very inclined to leave on a dramatic note. And if that's your style, I am not here to tell you not to do it or that it's wrong. I don't know that there is a right way or a wrong way, but my view is that I prefer to leave on a good note. So that is what I'm offering for you as well, is that I don't see the downside in leaving with good relationships intact. I personally am not one who will intentionally burn bridges. Some people will. I tend not to do that. And so I would invite you to think about how you can transition out of the job that you're in right now in the best possible way. So some things that you can do is to give adequate notice. So chances are you will have negotiated a start date that is reasonable, right? We talked about perhaps building in some vacation time for yourself. But in any event, you want to give adequate notice to your current employer so that there's lots of time, right? Time enough for them to perhaps replace you if that's required, and certainly enough time for you to wrap up the files that you're on and make sure that they're transitioned smoothly. Now, this can get a little bit tricky if you're in a really, really big matter. Sometimes you might stay on that matter. I've known lawyers who've transitioned from one job to another and who've maintained a certain level of involvement on a file because that's what the file required. And so there may be some creative options there for you. But ideally, the thing you want to do here is simply to give enough notice to your employer of your intended last day of work. Now, in that time that you are then at the firm, what I would invite you to do is to tidy up your files, right? Think about how you would like to receive a file if you were the person stepping onto a file. And if you are leaving your role, I'm going to guess that there are some files that you have that you don't love. I think even in the healthiest of practices, there are going to be those files that we kind of dread, we don't really want to work on, and you're going to be handing those off to others. And so you just want to think about how you can do that. I used to write transfer memos. I mean, that was something that was a practice when I was a lawyer. And so write up transfer memos, make sure that the documents are in order, that whoever is replacing you can step in. You might have conversations with other lawyers at your firm who you know will be taking on the project and help them become up to speed so that they are now comfortably stepping into your shoes. It may also mean that you're having conversations with your clients and letting them know that you're moving on and here's the next person that's going to take over, etc. So think about what that looks like for you. But the idea here is you want your files to be tidied up and transferred to new lawyers who will take over in your role. Now, another suggestion that I have here is not to pick fights, right? I mean, for some of you, you will be leaving an environment where you were not very happy, that the way that you were treated maybe wasn't the way that you would like to be treated. And, I think there's TV shows, I think maybe it's Bridget Jones, I don't know, but there's movies where they have these dramatic exit scenes where it's like you kind of resign in a big dramatic explosion of righteousness and justice and all that. Again, if that's your style, don't let me hold you back. But if you are looking to initiate a fight, just ask yourself if you want to, right? Is that something that is going to serve you, right? And it may be that is exactly what you need to do. It may be that it simply isn't worth your time to do that. So again, you might have this idea in mind of what it could look like. And maybe that's something that we can think about and, oh, wouldn't it be funny if, or great if, right? But just ask yourself if it's something that you actually want to do. Similarly, I don't see the upside in speaking negatively about the organization that you're leaving. Even if you had some concerns there, even if there were some problems, I don't know that there's a huge upside to that, especially on a grand scale. I mean, there may be people that are close to you, right, who you confide in, where you share your true feelings about things, but you don't necessarily need to make this a public announcement to everybody to hear. Again, this is my personal bias. You may see the world differently, and I don't want to tell you what to do. I'm just offering my approach. This is how I would do it for myself. You may be asked to do an exit interview. Why are you leaving the firm? Is there anything that we could have done differently so that you would stay? And so you just want to think about how to answer those questions in a way that best suits you. So you might be really interested in sharing some feedback. There may be some constructive feedback that you can offer to the firm for their future lawyers. And so if you do that, then that's great. I mean, it's a gift to the firm, right? They now have more information. Again, you just want to weigh that against the benefit to you, right? To what extent does that help you moving forward? Are there things that you would prefer not to say? You don't have to share any of that information. It really is your choice. So I would encourage you just to be mindful about how you would like to approach an exit interview if that's what you ultimately end up doing. And then finally, I would encourage you to find some form of closure for yourself, right? You may be leaving on the best of terms. It was a job that you absolutely loved, but it just wasn't the right fit for you anymore. So you'll want to wrap up those relationships. Maybe there will be a going away party for you. Maybe you'll be giving gifts or receiving gifts, exchanging them with certain members of the organization. And there's lots of things you can do. You'll probably send an email saying goodbye to the other lawyers and staff at the firm. So you'll want to have some form of closure before you move on from your firm. And there may be other closure too, right? Maybe you didn't leave on such great terms, in which case you might want to find a way to make peace with that. And then finally, you might want to be looking for the gratitude as well, right? It might be really easy to see why you would be grateful for a particular firm, a particular opportunity, or you might have to work a little bit harder. So that's when we get to step 2. So we've done the transition. We've managed to wrap things up where you are currently. And now we're thinking about success in your new role. And so now we are looking forward. So there's a couple of things I'd recommend that you do before you start. And the first thing that I would recommend that you do is to identify the challenges that laterals often face and to decide if any of these are going to be a challenge for you in particular. So I've got a few ideas here in terms of challenges that lawyers will frequently face when they are making a transition, a lateral transition. So one is that you're going from one firm to another, and the standards and the culture and the practices at your new firm might be quite different from your current firm. So I've seen this happen where lawyers go from a firm, for example, where maybe it's a little bit more casual, it's a little bit more informal, and they move into a firm where there are more systems in place, where there's a certain level of formality that is greater than where they were. And so that might require that you alter the way that you practice, that you adopt that more formal approach. Now, sometimes it's going to be the opposite, but I'd say where you're more likely to encounter a challenge is where you're entering into a more formal system than what it is that you are currently used to. Now, another challenge that you might find is that you don't have the benefit of the doubt. So if you've been in an organization for many, many years and you've established a really strong track record, if something goes a little bit sideways, people will look at you and they'll say, well, she's usually pretty consistent and this really is a one-off. And so I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. You may not have that if you step into a brand new organization where they don't have that same history of what it's like to work with you. Then if something goes wrong at the very beginning, then that becomes kind of like the measuring stick, or it's the first thing that they learn about you. And so that can create a little bit of friction. It can be a bit hard to come back from because you don't have that track record behind you. Now, this can also work to your advantage, right? When you're starting fresh, if you compare that, for example, to a firm where, let's say you started out as a summer student and then you worked your way up and maybe you're a 5 or 6 year call, maybe you're even a partner. But for some individuals in that firm, they continue to see you as though you were that summer student, that person they first met however many years ago. And so in some ways that might limit the options, right? That might limit their view of the potential that you have. So when you step into a new role, sometimes that can be to your advantage because people are meeting you where you are right now. And so they don't see any limits. They just see the potential. So it works both ways, but you might want to be mindful of the fact that your reputation is starting anew, right? You're starting afresh. And so you don't have the benefit of the years of proven track record that you may have had at your previous place of employment. Now, another factor to consider is a mismatch in terms of expectations and skills. So we talked in part 2 about your materials, right? And how you're representing yourself in your CV, in your cover letter, and of course, through your interview process. And so we would ideally solve for any mismatch in expectations at that point. But that being said, even when you are being perfectly candid, even when the firm thinks they are asking all the right questions, that sometimes, despite the best of intentions, there's a gap between what they think that you can do and what you actually have done in the past. And so you may need to close some gaps between the expectation and the reality, and that can be a little bit challenging. Another situation that can come off, and we've alluded to this already, but that's getting off on the wrong foot, right? If you find that you get into a new firm and you don't have that benefit of the reputation of years of practice, and maybe you make a mistake, or maybe you don't communicate at the level that they're expecting, right? In terms of frequency, maybe it's the quality of a particular work product that came through. You might find that you burn bridges at an early stage, and it can have an impact on the market for your work within that organization, within that law firm. So that's something that you might want to watch out for. And then finally, habits, right? We talked before in previous episodes in this 3-part series about how sometimes you will create habits in a role that you don't want to bring with you into a future role, right? Sometimes those habits are boundaries that you're not setting, or maybe it's practice management challenges that you're having that you don't want to bring with you. It could also be the style or quality of work product. I mean, it could be any number of things, but we want to be wary of bringing habits with you that maybe weren't serving you in your old role. We don't want to bring those with you into the new role either. So before you start, you're going to want to forecast what are some of the challenges that you might have. You might have heard me go through this list and say, thanks, Paula. I appreciate your information here. None of this really applies to me. I'm not worried about any of that. You might have identified a number of those or 1 or 2 of those where you think, okay, that's really something that I want to be mindful of, and think about how you might address those challenges proactively. So the second part to this, before you start, is to set some goals. And there's a podcast episode that I recorded all about lateral transitions, how to succeed as a lateral hire. It is episode 183. And what I recommend in that episode is to create a 30, 60, and 90-day plan for your new firm. And the idea here isn't necessarily that you follow that plan to a T. The idea is that you are turning your mind specifically to what you would like to accomplish at each of those intervals. And what that will do for you is give you a roadmap. And whether or not you hit every milestone on that roadmap doesn't really matter. You just want to have that intentionality. You want to be thinking about what you want to do going forward. Now, if you haven't listened to that podcast episode and you are about to make a lateral transition, I highly recommend listening to that. So again, that's 183. There are a number of suggestions in that episode that will help you to figure out where to focus your energy, what to think about when you're making those 30, 60, and 90-day plans. So that's work that you do before you start. Now, once you do start in your new role, so we've gotten past the point of thinking about our new job, and now you are in your new job, right? You are going to hit the ground running. So the first thing that I would invite you to think about is if you've got the option of working from home or working at the office, and I recognize that some offices are more virtual these days, but if you have a firm where they encourage their lawyers to be there in person, and maybe there's a work from home policy, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or some variation of that, I would encourage you to spend as much time as you possibly can at the office. Generally speaking, what I've heard from firms is that they really want their lawyers to be there in person as much as possible because it contributes to the culture. It makes it easier for you to have conversations with people. People will get to know you faster. You'll get to know more people. You'll be able to have those informal conversations that are harder to have if you're doing everything over Zoom and conference calls. And so I would encourage you to think about how you can spend as much time as possible in the office and do that. And I recognize that if you've got kids at home or some other factor that makes it harder for you to be in the office, that this might be challenging for you, but I'd encourage you to do it anyways. Try as much as possible to be in the office, meeting as many people as you possibly can. Now, I would also encourage you to set the tone right out of the gates, right? If you've had a habit of being somewhat reactive in your practice, kind of going with the flow, just seeing what comes your way, this is a great opportunity for you to shift into a more proactive approach to your practice. So again, doing that 30, 60, 90-day planning will help you with that, right? It'll help you be intentional, help you set goals, help you see what you want, and then go out and try to create that. You are establishing yourself for the first time in this new environment. So think about what impression it is that you are trying to create. And again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is you're starting here fresh, right? And so everybody is meeting you where you are right now and not as the summer student that you were way back when. So we want you to project that level of confidence. We want others to see you as somebody who can step into that role and to hit the ground running, start taking on work right away, integrate into the team, etc. So the next step is to identify what the success criteria are at your firm. Now, your firm may have a clear list of what they're looking for in their lawyers, in which case I would invite you to get your hands on that list and to figure out what you need to do in order to succeed. If there's not a list in writing, chances are you can glean what the success criteria are by looking at the lawyers around you, by talking to other lawyers, by talking to the director of professional development, by talking to a mentor. So get the information that you need to figure out what the success criteria are from the perspective of the law firm. I would also encourage you to think about your own success criteria, right? How will you evaluate your success in terms of integrating into the firm and performing at the firm? So I'm going to refer you here to episode 181 of the podcast. It's all about how to optimize your performance review in a law firm environment. And what I would encourage you to think about is that performance reviews are something that happen maybe once or twice a year, and that's fine. We don't have to wait for the official review to happen for you to be focusing on your performance, to focus on client service, internal client, external client, for you to be focusing on some of the factors that will be considered, right, in the context of those reviews. We want you to be preparing for your performance reviews year round. So particularly if you're a lawyer who will be receiving a review, right? If you're still at that stage of your practice, I would encourage you to think about what the criteria are and to ask yourself how you're going to meet those criteria. Now, quite closely aligned with that is the idea of expectations, right? We want to make sure that you know what the expectations are of you within your role, within your organization. So it may be really clear to you that you have a billable target, right? The firm might say, here's the number of hours that we require you to work every year in order for you to meet your target. In which case, that's great. You've got a nice, clear goal to work toward. Now, if your firm has a more flexible billing policy, I would still encourage you to get a number. I know for myself, I've had both situations. I strongly prefer having a target because then I know exactly whether I'm on track or not. And so for you, I'd encourage you to think about, okay, what are the hours? I know for some firms, there's a technical target, but then there's sort of the unwritten target. So you might try to glean that information as well. In terms of expectations, you might also want to get a sense of what the culture is like, right? Watch people, listen to people, see how they interact with each other. What is the culture like? Because you're going to want to understand what the expectations are in terms of how people are within the organization. You want to get to know people and their personalities, right? We know that lawyers are all very different, right? Some lawyers have very different working styles from other lawyers. Communication styles can be very different. Some people are much more direct. They are really to the point and they would like that from you as well. Others are more conversational. They take their time. And so we just want you looking around and assessing what the expectations are so that you know whether or not you're meeting standards. You'll want to get to know people's working preferences, right? If you're doing a lot of work with a particular lawyer and they're someone that you report to, you want to know what they like, right? You want to know how to please them. So they might share that information with you. You might ask other lawyers who work with that lawyer how best to succeed in that environment. You also want to make sure that you build trust. So I talk about this in the episode about lateral hires, and time management and delivering things on time and communicating at a decent cadence, being responsive. Those are relatively easy ways, right? It doesn't require a deep legal analysis in order for you to do those things, right? You can meet the deadlines. You can communicate proactively. That will go a long way toward building trust and building your relationships with the lawyers that you work with and building that trust with your clients. So to me, that is something that is a relatively easy win. If you need help with your time management practice, systems, all of that, I can help you with that. It's something that I do quite a bit of in my practice. And so please do feel free to reach out if you feel like that's an area where you've struggled before and you'd like some tips and tricks on how to improve that. There's also a number of resources in this podcast series about time management. There's a time management for lawyers podcast series roadmap. You can download that. I'll put a link to it in the notes that go with this episode as well. So lots and lots of support for you there, but please don't miss out on opportunities to build trust over things like missed deadlines or ineffective communication. You can do those things. And so let's make sure that you win those points where you can. And then you might also lose trust in terms of the quality of the work product. So again, if you're going from one firm to another, you might find that the standards are really, really different. So again, if you're going from a firm where the standards are super, super high to one where maybe it's a little bit more casual, and this does happen, then chances are you're not going to struggle so much, although you might, right? Because if you're used to a firm where you're allowed to do Cadillac style work, and I use Cadillac realizing now it's probably a dated reference, but where there's no limit on time in terms of what you can deliver to your client. If you go from that environment to an environment where what they really want is just cheap and cheerful, and you're doing the Cadillac service, you might struggle, right? You might need to learn how to deliver a product that is more streamlined and aligned with the budget of the clients you're working with. So it can happen in that direction. It can also happen in the opposite direction, right? Where you're at a firm, the standards are just different, right? Maybe you move from one firm to another and they want you to elevate the standard of your work product. And so if that's the case, then yes, you may also struggle. So you want to be thinking about the quality of your work product. And as much as possible, we want to make sure that you're building trust through the quality of what it is that you're delivering. So that was expectations. You want to make sure that you're understanding what the expectations are so that you can meet them. And then another really important factor to consider once you're in the role is relationships, right? And this is probably first and foremost, but here it is in this sequence. I didn't mention it first, but it's super, super, super important. When you think about all that you do as a lawyer, the end user is always a person, right? It's a judge who's reading the submission. It's a client who has retained you to help them with a problem, even if it's a corporate client, there is a person that you are reporting to. There is a person who is responsible for the mandate, who is looking to you to help them, to make sure that the problem gets dealt with effectively. They've got people that they report to as well. So even though law is sometimes very abstract, it can be very technical, humans ultimately are the consumers and the beneficiaries of your services. And so here, I really would encourage you to think about the relationships that you want to build in your organization. Now, these relationships might be ones that you identified in your 30, 60, 90-day plans, right? The people that you most want to connect with within the firm. And once you're there, I really strongly encourage you to focus on relationships. Now, I confess that I can be somewhat of an introvert, and sometimes in an environment like a firm, I might tend to want to be more quiet. I might want to keep to myself. If you're like me, then I would invite you to push against that natural instinct and to force yourself to go and really proactively go and meet people. So I give this advice in the episode about lateral hires. I gave this advice in terms of the mindset in part 1 of the series. Take 100% responsibility here. Take 100% responsibility for meeting people, for initiating relationships, for developing relationships at this new firm, because as much as everyone may welcome you, they may be excited to have you join them, chances are they're busy, they are preoccupied, they've got files, they've got clients, they've got families, they've got all of that. And so you want to take responsibility to be the one to take initiative. If you reach out to people and they aren't super receptive or they don't respond to your email, don't give up, right? It might just be that they're busy. And so you may just need to work a little bit harder to establish those relationships in the first place. And then finally, in terms of those initial steps that you want to take when you actually start that new job is systems. Right? There are going to be email systems, document saving systems, all of the systems, right? Depending on whether you're in litigation or in corporate, more systems, more software. So as quickly as you can, I would encourage you to learn the software. It might be easier to do it when you have a bit of extra time, right? Before you get too busy. It might also help once you're in there, right? Once you actually start applying the systems to do things, you can learn more as you go. But as much as you can, learn the systems, learn them early on. So the last chapter here, right? So we've talked about today, at least, leaving your firm on a good note. We've talked about things that you can do before you start at your new job to prepare. And we've just gone through a list of things you can do once you start your new job in order to succeed. And I'll just quickly recap those here. Work as much as possible in the office versus working from home. Set the tone by being proactive. Identify what the success criteria are, both from the perspective of the firm and also from your own perspective. We talked about expectations, understanding what those expectations are, and then meeting those expectations. Identifying the relationships that you want to form, and then taking 100% responsibility for building those relationships. We talked about systems, right? What systems do you need to learn in order to thrive and simply mechanically get through the day-to-day at your new role? And then finally, that brings us to ongoing. And I've got a few points here to think about in terms of your long-term success in your new role. So first of all, impress with your work product. So here, this would be true at any stage of your career, and particularly so in your new environment. So we want exemplary client service. Again, there are some aspects of lawyering that are super, super challenging, right? Those really complex problems, those thorny cases, delivering things on time, asking for feedback, being gracious, being responsive. It's relatively low-hanging fruit. So take advantage. Deliver that beautiful, exemplary client service that we know that you are capable of. Follow up. When you work with your internal clients, your external clients, follow up with them, right? Ask them for feedback. Ask them if there's anything else you can do on a particular file. And I would also encourage you to express appreciation. So what I mean by this is, as you're building your practice, there are going to be things that you really love to do and things that you maybe don't love to do. Now, I think it's always good practice to express gratitude and be friendly and pleasant to work with. And particularly where there are things that people are doing, right? If there's additional mentorship they're giving you, if it's a particular type of file that they're giving you, and you would love to have more opportunities to do more of that or to learn in that way, let people know that you really appreciate it. Acknowledge them, appreciate them. And that is going to work to signal to them. They will feel appreciated. They will feel encouraged, and they will want to do more of that. They want to give you more of that type of work, more of that type of support. So that's my recommendation there, is to express appreciation. Then we're going to want to focus on your substantive growth. Again, this would apply no matter where you are, but how can you improve your skills? What do you need to learn as a practitioner to bring yourself to the next level? Here, also, I would encourage you to ask questions if you need to, right? So you might feel like you're too senior to ask a question, or you're too far down the road to ask a question. You're never too far down the road to ask the question. So even when it's uncomfortable, if there's a question on your mind about something to do with the way that the firm is run, or something to do with work that you are involved in, whatever it happens to be, ask questions, right? Don't let things sort of fester and linger if it could be resolved by you asking a question. And then continue to check in with yourself regularly. So I'll suggest 6 months just to give you a framework. So every 6 months, you just want to check in. How are things going? Are you where you wanted to be? Are there things that maybe slid off your radar that you'd like to bring back on your radar? Are you happy? Are you growing? Are you thriving? And if what you find is you've made this transition, right? You've gone from job A to job B, and job B just isn't working out. If it isn't working out and you don't see how it will work out, then I would encourage you to allow yourself the grace of changing jobs once again. Now, there's a lot of mixed opinion about how long you should stay in a job before you decide to move again. I've heard the rule of thumb is roughly 1 year. So maybe you stick it out, but maybe not. I've known lawyers who have transitioned sooner than that because it wasn't a good fit. So if you find that you've transitioned from job A to job B, it's not what you expected, then don't feel like you have to stay there for any particular length of time or forever. Certainly not forever. And if you need help with that, again, reach out to me, reach out to someone else who can help you, reach out to a mentor, but don't feel like you have to stay there because you've made a transition. You absolutely can move again. It's not going to put a black mark on your CV that you will never recover from. I would much rather see you make a transition at an earlier stage and find something that you really love instead of suffering in silence because you feel like you have no choice. So that, my dear friend, is what I have to offer in this 3-part series about how to go from job A to job B, how to get a job at your new firm. So I wanted to thank you for joining me for this podcast series. It has been such a pleasure to record these episodes for you, and I really have done my best to deliver the key pieces of what I think are the steps required to go from job A to job B successfully. Now, if you are transitioning, you have got a plan to follow. And if you're thinking about transitioning, you've now got this information so that you can make a decision based on what you can expect going forward if you're going to make a change. And my invitation for you, my hope for you is that you make whatever changes are necessary for you to have the best career that you can have. I don't want you thinking that it's going to be too hard or you don't know what the steps are to get that new job. I don't want that to keep you from making a transition. So I'll do the checklist. You'll find that as a free download on the webpage with this podcast episode. You'll find it in the notes. So that will be a resource for you. You've got everything in one place. And if you would like additional support, I can 100% help you with your transition. So ways that I can do that, I can help you with that decision, right? If you are stuck at that stage where you think you want to leave, but you're not sure, then we can have a conversation. I can help you navigate your decision, right? Whether you want to stay or whether you want to go. I can help you with that GPS piece, right? Getting to know yourself better, getting to know what your values are, getting to know what your strengths are, and helping you discover what it is that you really want out of your legal career and what you want out of your next job. I can help you understand what it is that you don't want, right? Sometimes that can be hard for us to accept, right? If what we thought we want turns out not to be what we want, it might be difficult. So you might want some support making that decision. I can help you explore different options that might be available to you. So sometimes it can be really helpful to talk to somebody who has a different perspective on what type of jobs are out there, both at law firms and outside of law firms. I can help you build or rebuild your confidence. So if you find that you've reached a stage where you're not feeling very good about yourself as a lawyer, maybe you're even thinking about leaving the profession altogether, I can support you in rebuilding your confidence so that you make decisions going forward based on a position of strength instead of feeling like you're reactive, you're kind of running away from something that isn't working. I can help you with your materials, so your CV, your cover letter, how you're approaching your job applications, your strategy, your networking, your informational interviews. I can help you to prepare for the interviews themselves, right? How to put your best foot forward, how to think of examples and ways that you can answer questions. We can do mock interviews if that's something that would be helpful for you. And I can help you evaluate your interviews, right? After the fact, I can help you evaluate your options. If you have more than one opportunity, more than one offer, which one is best suited for you? I can help you build your confidence through the process, right? I think for some people, this process can be an opportunity to really develop more relationships within the legal community and feel even better about yourself as you really learn more about your strengths, learn more about the legal environments that you could be in. I can also help you if your confidence starts to wane, right? If you find you've been at it for a while and you're getting discouraged, I can be there to help, cheer you up. I can also help you decide which role is best for you. And finally, I can help you to hit the ground running when you finally do find that new position that you're going to move into. I can help you with what we talked about today, right? Making those plans, deciding how you want to present in your new role, and how you're going to navigate any of the potential challenges that can arise as a lateral hire. So once again, it has been an absolute pleasure. I'm excited that you were able to join me, and I'm excited to help you in any way that I can with your transition. Now, if you come back next week, I will be delighted to share an interview with you. I've got an amazing guest who is going to be joining us, Beth Mountford. She is a legal recruiter. She's been on the podcast before, and she and I are going to dive into more questions about job transitions. So this really is a comprehensive series that I have designed for you. I hope you are enjoying it. I hope you're finding it to be as helpful as I would love for you to find it to be. And again, if you have any questions for me, please do feel free to reach out. You can send me a DM, send me an email. I would absolutely love to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and look forward to our next conversation. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.